Should you be suspended? Is it responsible to have a person with your views speaking to the public when you clearly refuse to condemn that which needs to be condemned?
If people truly believed in free speech, the first people they should be championing the right to express themselves are the most discriminated minorities, such as the Muslim community.
All because of this imaginary boundary drawn by some Western guy, the Durand line, that says that these are two separate countries, where these are peoples that both believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. How are they two separate peoples? They're one people.
نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to another episode of the Outside the Box podcast. And today I'm very glad to announce that we have a very special guest. We are truly out of the box today because we have someone from the UK, someone very well known to the people who have been following various debates around the topic of Gaza, someone who has been on the Piers Morgan show. So we have Abdullah Al-Andalusi with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you doing, brother?
I'm good, Tico.
Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah. So you have learned quite some words.
Just a few words to get me by.
Okay. That's great. So I'll jump right into asking my questions for today. And I would like you to introduce and tell our viewers and listeners who Abdullah Al-Andalusi is.
Well, I hate talking about myself. I would say I'm perhaps a boat rocker. I would say I like to rock boats, cause trouble, but only for the good. I'm basically a da'i, for want of a better description, and I call to Islam in different platforms through different means, whether it's lectures, whether it's debates, whether it's on TV platforms, wherever I can, I call for Islam and the interests of the Muslims and advocating for the rights of Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's because it's very hard, I think, for people to guess by your looks that you are a revert to Islam. So I would also like you to tell us a bit about your story of reverting to Islam.
Okay, so after talking about myself, that's the second thing I hate talking about because it really wasn't something so exciting or interesting to talk about. It's just simply, apart from, the interesting part was discovering Islam, but there wasn't some deep, profound spiritual journey filled with signs and meanings and things that other people might say. It was just simply a straightforward, I'm curious, I want to know, I want to learn about the world. I want to know for certain what my purpose in life is. I want to discover, do we have a purpose in life? What is it? How do I know the religion I'm born into is true? Is it just an accident of geography, what we believe? Or is there actually a real truth behind everything? So I was very curious at 10 years old. I came from a mixed Christian, mixed secular background. I went to a Church of England school, Anglican church, is known outside of England. And I was given minimal education on Christianity, like every other child in my school was. But mostly it was a secular liberal society. And so, Hollywood was teaching you that there's no such thing as a purpose in life, or you can't discover it anytime soon. Maybe if you spend 80 years under a Bodhi tree, you'll discover it somehow. And then you'll shortly die thereafter. But apart from that, most people won't discover it in their lifetime. So no point wasting your life seeking it. Just focus on, quote unquote, living your life. So seeking ephemeral, short-term pleasures, as opposed to asking questions and searching. So I decided that, well, there has to be a purpose in life because there's surely a reason behind everything. There's a cause behind everything. And also that I didn't want to waste my life living according to something that wasn't my purpose in life, because then it's pointless and I've wasted my life. So first I want to know what my purpose in life is, and then I know what I can do in life, to pursue it. And I was at 10 years old, I decided to leave Christianity, but I was worried about hell. There's something about hell that just strikes me as true. And there's an accountability for human decisions that's going to come for everyone. So that I always knew that in some ways hell must be true, but I was open for the possibility that maybe it wasn't. I was not saying I'm going to make any certainty, although it seemed very rational that God exists, so I never stopped believing in God. But I kind of made a deal with God at 10 years old. I made a prayer, and I said, look, I'm going to leave Christianity because I don't know if that's true or not, and I don't want to make you angry, or I don't want to be following falsehood. So if it's true, then bring me back to it. And if it's not, then show me the truth. And I promise, if you show me what the truth is, I will tell it to the world. Okay. Right. So that was my deal I made. And this is in the era where the internet wasn't that was just starting up, you could say. So I relied on very old-fashioned means of research called books, if you've heard of those things, and libraries. Libraries, yeah, as well. Those Paleolithic sites, it seems. So I went there and I read everything I could find on any belief system, religion, cult, ideology, New Age, spirituality, you name it, I read it. From Rastafarianism, very niche Jamaican belief, to Moonies, which I believe is in Korea, if I remember correctly, or Japan, I forget where it was. These are new age, more relatively new cults and things like this, the Moonies. So I read everything, right? You can imagine, literally everything. And I actually left Islam to the very end of that. I knew about Islam, but you see, Islam seemed very simple. And I had an assumption that I was told by Hollywood, so it must be true. The assumption is that the truth is very hidden and esoteric and mystical, and you have to spend most of your life finding it. But Islam was very simple, so it's like, oh, it can't be that. It must be something very complex, and you have to it's hidden, and you have to work things out and what have you. So after going through all the different religious beliefs, and I would go through it and I would try to disprove it. So I'd say, okay, well, what's Buddhism about? Well, the purpose in life in Buddhism is to be enlightened. And what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is to know your purpose in life. I was like, well, that's kind of circular in a sense. Although more fundamentally, the karmic religions, the problem with the karmic religions, they say, okay, they in one mainstream, let's say, synthesis or consensus in Hinduism, because Hinduism is multiple religions. It's not one religion, it's multiple religions. It's just a British word for all the non-Muslim religions and non-Christian religions in India. Anyway, they said that everyone was part of this divine force, Brahma, and then Brahman, and then you split up and became souls, and you incarnate into this earth, and then you have to basically meditate and reflect and seek oneness back to Brahman. Mm-hmm. My question is, how does Brahman split up in the first place? Right? And what? So an infinite, all-powerful force, you can split from it. So are you also infinite and all-powerful and all-knowing? But then how are you ignorant at the same time? It was so many contradictions. It didn't make sense. So I went through these by process of elimination. Judaism posited a bunch of beliefs about prophets in the Middle East and so on and so forth, but I didn't see any substantive proofs, and it was too focused on just one tribe, you could say, or the 12 tribes of Israel. Not, what about the rest of humanity? What did they do? So I bumped back into Islam, and it was through an unexpected angle, which was, you'll find it strange, it was the woman's hijab. I asked, why do women wear hijab in Islam? Like, why is it a requirement? Well, why don't they just not wear it? And I was thinking about this, and this is obviously, I live in a secular society, growing up very young, so puberty started to hits me. And there was this TV series, it was an American TV series, a comedy series called Ali McBeal. Maybe in Germany they might have shown some episode when you were living there. And it was about this neurotic female lawyer. She works in a law firm, but it was all about the sexual tension, sexual chemistry, sexual politics. I was wondering, that anyone actually doesn't practice any law there? Everyone's talking about, this man, it's a nice lawyer, he looks so nice, and all this stuff. It seemed so preoccupied. It says there were so many complications, frustrations, everything. And I thought, then I thought back to the hijab, and it's like, what is Islam trying to do here? If Islam was invented by men, surely men would like to see women. Surely I thought that would make more sense. If you just wanted to, if you were inventing a religion, you'd want to see women more. But I thought about it and said, what's Islam trying to achieve with the hijab? So, well, it's trying to remove sexual politics, sexual tension, sexuality from the public life. You don't want sex in public, sex in private in your home. That's where it belongs. Not in it interferes with university, interferes with the workplace, interferes with going outside to the market. Why are you frustrating yourselves looking at people or being persuaded or seduced by people? Where 99.99% of the people that you will feel sexual agitation towards because of revealing clothing, you're never going to be able to sleep with them. So it's just creating frustration.
That's true.
Right? So Islam seems to aim at something that seems very common sense when you think about it. Like, how about just remove sexuality where it doesn't belong and stop it from making complicated situations? I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. So Islam has solutions for society, as well as a belief system about worship and so on and so forth. Well, that's something I'd expect from a purpose in life, because humans are not part-time humans. So how can our purpose in life be part-time? It must be full, it must be all the time, right? So that's where I started to realize that Islam sounds like something I would expect would come from the creator. If you just look past the fact that, yeah, it's in Arabic because it has to come in some language. It can't be in every language throughout whole history in one massive library of billions of books. That would be unwieldy, right? So it has to come to some human society at its time, with the language of its time, rather. And so if you look past that and you see, well, it says that every society or every nation at some point or civilization received prophets. And this is the latest iteration of it. It's an unchanging message, not a message like, oh, we've updated it, or there's a new message now, which didn't make sense because humans haven't changed. Human nature hasn't changed. So why you need a brand new religion with radical different laws and things like this? I mean, I understand if you might have a holy day from Saturday, okay, to distinguish ourselves from this previous revelation and maybe it got corrupted, we'll have the holy days on Friday. Which day you have the holiday doesn't matter to human nature. But the issues like, for example, prohibitions on taking things that can intoxicate your mind, your aql, when what distinguishes you between an animal is that you have an aql, right? You have an intellect. So why would you then impede your intellect and interfere with your intellect and then become like an animal or worse? So that all these start to make sense. And so I start to say, okay, I think Islam is likely the purpose of life of human beings, and it's highly likely it came to the creator. So my decision was to adopt it until if I see any problems with it or what have you, then I say, okay, fine, but right now I'll adopt it because I'm obliged to adopt what I think is the most likeliest chance to give me the answers. And I didn't know that you had to say the Shahada officially. So for me, it was just like, okay, the Shahada, okay, I believe in, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, I believe in this. My Shahada was me telling to my mother, I said, you know what, Mum, I think I'll be Muslim. That was my Shahada day, because I didn't know you had to actually make an official pronouncement. Of course, I've been pronouncing it every time I pray, but ever since. But so I became Muslim at 14 years old. And then at about, you could say, 17 to 18 years old, I became certain that Islam wasn't just the most likeliest explanation for reality, but it was the only possible explanation for reality. And then I reached yaqeen, certainty on the matter. So in a nutshell, that's my journey. I elaborate on it only because I want people to reflect on actually why they are a Muslim and to ask similar questions.
Exactly. I think your story, as you said, is a simple one, but I think at the same time quite profound. And many people can and they should relate to your story, which is a story of discovery, which everyone should at some time, preferably while they are getting into this balugha, they should go through this thinking process and discovery process. Well, something which would be, I think, a question for many people living in this country, Pakistan, is that how come someone from the West, living in the West, and he changes to a religion which, not many people here revere as such, as being something so special that someone would give up their whole life and maybe their whole social fabric or whatever it was before. So how do you see, especially after becoming a Muslim now, how do you see the Western society from which so many in Pakistan are impressed and they see it like something very special and many want to go there as well and live their lives there? What's your comment on that?
Well, firstly, I have to clarify that I had it easier than many reverts or converts I know. So my mum was liberal to the point that religion didn't matter in her life except for the rituals and the rites of passage moments like weddings or funerals or things like this. So she was liberal to the point that she thought religion was inconsequential. So it had no impact on life, so who cares? It's like a fashion, you can choose, you can change it. Maybe she thought I was going through a phase, as a child, and I would come out of it. But 30 plus years later, I think she realizes that it's not a phase anymore. So I didn't sacrifice, in the 90s, I didn't have to sacrifice anything to be a Muslim. So I have to clarify, it wasn't this thing. Many of my of colleagues of mine, they've gone through much more troubling stories. Their parents, even though also being liberal, viewed Islam as this foreign religion, especially after 9/11. It was a problem. But I converted before 9/11. So Muslims were actually a minority, a very small minority, very, very small minority in UK. Whereas today, they are about almost 7% of the population of the UK. So as Muslims become more visible, Islam becomes more of an issue or problem in the West in terms of they become more intolerant of it. They view it as a danger, even if it's actually gives guidance to make people actually better citizens. Don't drink alcohol. The drinking culture in England is excessive. There's violence every Friday night. It's normal. The police know they're going to have a busy time Friday and Saturday nights, right? It's just going to be crazy people, drunk, getting violent, shouting, screaming. Domestic violence is standard stuff. So that was my situation. I didn't face any sacrifice, but after 9/11, then I started to feel the pinch, right, of being a Muslim. And of course, by that point in time, I was vocal. So many vocal Muslims were, you could say, noticed it by the government radar. And many of us were harassed by the government in different ways. So in England, what you can call freedom of speech, which is actually more limited than America. America is more open in freedom of speech. You can be racist in America.
Maybe not
in England,
anymore.
You can't be racist.
Maybe not anymore in the US.
Yeah, not anymore in the US with Trump's policies showing the true colors.
And also with what's happening in Gaza particularly. So those things, they are not allowed to discuss and maybe demonstrate and protest for in the US.
No, there's other ways that society can be intolerant towards you in the West, other than imprisoning you. So they can make you lose your job, get you blacklisted. Every time you travel, you get harassed by security.
Cancel your green card or your visa.
Yes, if you are a permanent resident, you can have your permanent residency revoked. Now, in England, when you are a citizen and you're not an English citizen, as in you're not Anglo-Saxon origin citizen or a Scottish or what have you, in theory, and they have revoked your passport and your citizenship. They can actually revoke your citizenship if many Muslims who are of Asian extraction, so they're not Anglo-Saxon origin, they had their...
We call them gore.
Gore, okay, yeah. Yeah, no, I am aware of those terms. It's not politically correct to use those terms in England to call them gore because it's racist. So, okay, well, I'll just use more specific term, Anglo-Saxon or whatever, right? So the intolerance is of a different kind, because in the West, they learned that if you imprison someone, you make them out to be more famous. So they learned a better way is just to make life really uncomfortable and unlivable for you. No job, no income, nothing for you. You'll be really poor And you can't do much when you're really poor. You can't do much when it's hard for you to travel, or you can't give talks in other countries when your visas get denied or rejected or you get banned. So they found what they would deem a more clever way to control speech they don't like. So locking people up is deemed to be too unnecessary and counterproductive. They say it wasn't wise. They have a better way of doing the same thing, of harassing people and limiting free speech. But Western civilization, currently, because it's militarily and economically superior, I am aware that many Muslims and others throughout the world make the mistake of conflating Western's ideas with its superior military and economic position in the world. That's not the same thing. The West,
and this is not the result of that. So
no,
okay,
no. I teach Western history and the philosophy of the history of Western philosophy as well. So the West had what's called the Renaissance. The Renaissance happened in the 15th century. So let's say about the 1400s, roughly, 1300s, 1400s. Some people say there was a 11th century Renaissance too. So this is where the West encountered Arabic books of science, Eastern Roman translations of Greek thinkers that had come in from the conquest of Constantinople and others. And it really jolted their thinking. They started to see the new ideas, new inventions. And prior to that, the general idea in the West was the end times are coming, so there's no point in doing anything. Just wait for Jesus to come. Just wait for the Jesus to come. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. Right? Sorry, commonalities. Anyway, so don't do anything. It is Yom Kiyama. Just wait for it to happen. So you can't improve society. All you can do is make sure that people have the right aqidah and that they are doing the right actions, they're praying and they're doing the right rituals in the church and they're going to confession, Catholic rituals, and that's it. That was the Catholic Church's only role, was to maintain the flock of Christians until the end times comes, and then the new, better world will be created when Jesus comes a second time. That was the Christian vision of the world. So what changed was they discovered that, these infidels, Muslims, the Moors and Saracens, as they call them, they have like better society than us. They're like they have better adab, better akhlaq. You can see it in their writings. They're like, how are these barbarians or infidels having better manners, better, more safe society? They have all these inventions and things better than us. We are the ones with the right revelation. How are they better than us? And they were clever about this. They said, well, let's learn from them. And they discovered something. The key change was, maybe you can improve society without having to wait for Jesus. That was the change. That changed the European mindset. And then that was the Renaissance.
It came out of the fatalistic thinking, right?
Yes. To the idea that progress can be made to human conditions in society, and it would also then make them more moral. Because if you're poor, then you have to survive, you can do whatever it takes. But if you're rich, notice that rich people tend to behave better because they don't need to, well, in theory, lie or cheat or steal or kill, in theory anyway, right? So it was deemed that if you improve society would improve its morals. No need to wait for Jesus to come or just tell people about hellfire all the time and scare them. It wasn't enough as a motivation to do that. And subhanAllah, when I read the writings, Hugo Grotius, or it was Martin Luther and many others, when they were talking about their own society, and they say, why are we so backward compared to the Turks? Why are we backward compared to these infidels or what have you? How comes we always fight each other, and when we fight, we have no limits on how we fight each other. But look at how they have limits and they have some considerations and what have you. They're much more civilized than us. SubhanAllah, it's like, wow, it's like a complete reversal of this. So they took our technology, they learned from our development. They didn't take our Aqidah books, right? They said, no, we don't want that. We just want your maths, your physics, your chemistry, and the sense of improvement that you enacted in your society. And that's when they did. And that Renaissance lasted for about, well, let's say if you take it from the 11th century, so it went for about 600 years before liberalism ever was invented in the West. It was invented accidentally, actually. It wasn't as a deliberate policy. The Enlightenment, as they call it, quote unquote, that came at least around the 1600s. So if we take 1100s as a start point, so it's 500 years between the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. And by the Enlightenment, Europe physically, materially looked much different, right? They weren't wearing medieval clothing anymore. They were wearing the three-corner hats and all the frilly shirts and all this stuff, and they were talking about being refined and gentlemen, all this kind of stuff. All that development happened when there was no liberalism, no secularism invented in the West. But it was simply a byproduct of the trajectory of making progress. The question was, and it was answering a problem, which is, well, in our societies, we seem to have fights over which Aqidah the government has to impose on the people. Is it going to be, and it was between Protestants, not between Catholics and Protestants, which people actually misunderstand. That was already resolved in the Treaty of Westphalia. I won't go too much into detail on that. They already came to an issue where they said they wouldn't fight anymore, even though the Pope wanted to keep fighting. He wasn't a peaceful Pope like today. They weren't the peaceful institution. But they came to an agreement. But the Protestants, they said, okay, well, we don't need the Catholic Church anymore. We don't need the ijma anymore. We'll interpret it. But the problem was that each Protestant has his own interpretation. So the Lutherans fought the Calvinists, and the Anglicans fought the Lutherans and the Calvinists, and Anabaptists was on one faction. They started to torture each other, kill each other, massacre each other. That's where they wanted to have a solution to that problem, because the Christian doctrine didn't have any guidance on politics. It's not Islam has guidance on politics. Christian doctrine, it did away with the old laws. So what do you do? How do you govern society? They don't know. But that wasn't the main issue. The main issue was they believed that the government has to impose its interpretation of Christian Aqidah on the people. So to save you, right, in the hereafter. So they're going to torture you, not because they're being bad. They'll say, we torture out of love, Christian love. I'm not joking. This is what their thinkers came up with. Martin Luther himself, John Calvin, these top thinkers said these things. And they couldn't take anymore all this torturing, killing, and fighting wars. So instead they said, okay, you know what? Let's get rid of Aqidah from state. Secularism.
That was the solution, right?
That was the solution.
And interestingly, them disconnecting the Aqidah from their lives led to progress and maybe some kind of unification. Whereas because there were these issues which you just discussed, but for Muslims, doing the same results in the exact opposite. So it creates divisions, it creates issues, problems. What do you think about this?
Well, secularism didn't create material progress. Remember, they were already materially progressing by that point in time. It was getting faster and faster as material progress does. It just eliminated religion being the basis for civil wars.
Okay.
It didn't mean that civil wars stopped happening in the West, and it definitely did not mean they stopped fighting each other as states. There was constant wars between European countries, even after secularism, after liberalism. And Napoleon Bonaparte was a liberal dictator. He wasn't elected, and he viewed it as his role to spread liberalism not by the sword, by the bullet and the cannon throughout Europe, creating modern Europe as we see it today, deposing dictators, creating republics and things like this, based on secular liberalism and so on. So the French love him today. He's a dictator. He was never elected guy. Yeah. And the American Civil War was massively destructive. We see this. So it didn't stop civil wars, didn't stop the American War of Independence detaching from Britain. It didn't stop any of these things. But it just resolved a uniquely European problem, which was wars of Aqidah. In the Muslim world, while you did have the occasional problems with Mu'tazilite caliphs imposing Mu'tazilite beliefs, only for 3 caliphs, the general understanding amongst Muslims was that the best way to fight out ikhtilaf fil aqidah, ikhtilaf in creed, is the scholars would write refutations and books, and you'd get book wars, refutation wars. They would do refutation against bid'ah and so on. That was the best way to resolve it. The caliphate, the Islamic system, would only prosecute people who went out of the fold of Islam in a very clear-cut way, right? So they clearly rejected Islam in a very clear, not a matter of interpretation, but what is known as ma'lum fi din bil darura, what is known as in this deen by necessity. So we never had this uniquely European problem, right, of aqidah imposition as much as they did. So secularism and liberalism, which came afterwards, liberalism, the idea that everyone liberalism, it was initially it was simply the idea that you have a common law for everybody. That's initially what it was. You don't have a dictatorship. So, for example, in Saudi Arabia, the early Western thinkers would say that in Saudi Arabia, the Saudis are the property of the king. Okay? So he can kill anyone he wants in Saudi Arabia. He can arrest anyone he wants. He doesn't need a reason. Maybe you just offend him one day. Maybe he doesn't like look at your face. Maybe you can be well behaved, but he can just arrest you, what have you. So if he can do whatever he wants to you, then you're his property. That's what they would argue. So liberalism was simply about escaping absolute dictatorships. That was simply what it was, but it became something else. And it became about, well, what should be the rules that everyone should be lived by? Well, maybe just give people as much freedom as possible then to do whatever they want without realizing how much consequences that would occur. And the primary consequence of liberalism was its economic system, where it allowed initially unlimited accumulation of wealth to the point that it created mass poverty. And at least in the turn of the century, between the 18th century and 19th century, around that point in time, liberalism actually failed. So in America, 1% of the population, you think today 1% of the population owns 50% of the wealth or 60% of the wealth. That's pretty bad. Back then it was 80% of the wealth owned by only 1% of the population. If you see Charles Dickens, that English writer, he was talking about society in London, the center of the British Empire. You had women basically just leaving their children to die because they couldn't take care of them, or they're becoming so drug addicted in their poverty that their children were just lying limp on them and they didn't do anything. He talked about the workhouses for the poor, that they were exploited by just children were sent to do slave labor because that's the only way they could get some basic food. It was really a nasty situation for people if you weren't wealthy in London. And this was under liberalism. Everyone forgets this. So actually liberalism technically collapsed and failed more than 100 years ago. What we have is liberalism 2.0, a patch-up system with welfare and the healthcare system, which is subsidized by the state, even though right now as we speak, it's actually collapsing in England. It's failing in England. But anyway, I'm going to digress. So point is, of this history lesson is, liberalism and secularism did not give the West its material progress. What gave it its progress was a very simple concept, which is it's possible to improve your society materially and also morally by improving its conditions. That was a simple concept. Right? Don't wait for the Jesus to do it. Do it yourself.
Something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentions as إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the situation of a people unless they change what is within them. So,
and Ibn Khaldun in his Muqaddimah discussed that point where he said that a defeated people who think if you think you are defeated, you are defeated. So you will be materially defeated. If you think that you can actually change, improve, and develop, then your society will change, improve, develop. there's a military adage, a military saying, which is defeat is something that happens in the mind of the enemy, right? So you don't make them defeated physically. You only defeat them once they accept defeat.
That's true, and that brings me to your tour of Pakistan and your experience so far. So from this perspective, must have met many people here, people on the street, people discussing with you, doing podcasts, and you also experienced, shall I call it a mini war or whatever, of 4 days. So what do you think about the people of Pakistan? Are they defeated? Did they seem defeated?
So I must say that before I came to Pakistan, although I have read quite a lot about Pakistan, mostly wars, history, the time of colonialism, so obviously before the independence, I haven't really experienced it firsthand. Unfortunately, I relied on a lot of negative comments by UK Pakistanis who have been told by the previous podcast I was on, the brother was telling me, that's just because they're mere Puris and from Jhelum. I don't want to get involved with. I don't know what's going on, but they're just negative. They have a negative viewpoint on Pakistan. But I mostly heard complaints about Pakistan. Oh, corrupt government, and there's blackouts on electricity and so on, and a whole bunch of things, whatever. But you see, I've been to many Arab countries, and this is the first non-Arab Muslim country I've actually been to. I plan to go to Turkey later on this year, inshallah. And I must say that you have, and many of my colleagues in the Dawah have said the same thing who've came here, there's a lot of khair in Pakistan, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah.
The people here are much more humble compared to other parts of the Muslim world I've seen. Unfortunately, in those parts, they should be more humble as well. There is I really knew that industrially, Pakistan has its own military industrial base, have nuclear weapons, strong army. And of course, what happened in this recent conflict just emphasized that
the whole world knows now.
Defeated a superior air force in quantity with better training. I think there was there's a US senator, I forgot his name. He said that the best, after the best pilots in the world, which he actually thought was the Israeli pilots are the best in the world. After them, it's the Pakistani Air Force, right? So it was really known, his reputation. But not just that. On the ground, the government is more organized. I actually see less corruption from people in border guards, police, whatever I've seen people just take bribes in many Arab countries. Not every Arab country, of course. And of course, the Gulf countries which have oil are an exception because they're just city states with basically lots of oil, and so they have lots of money, so they don't need to be corrupt, I suppose. Well, at least the average soldier or policeman or border guard.
But from the mindset, so there is this defeatist mindset you would see in many people. So what do you think about, especially because you were here during those war days, what did you sense?
Well, as I said, if I didn't have access to the news or the internet, I wouldn't have seen anything different.
Yeah.
Everyone just going about their business.
Yeah.
No one actually seemed to care. And I spoke to people about it, and they're just like, yeah, it's just Pakistan and India having another fight. So what? And that's it. Like, oh, but no possible, like nuclear escalation or invasion or anything. That's like,
So what? Huh?
Yeah, they honestly did. You wouldn't know. You just wouldn't know. The only thing that gave it away was at night there was a blackout to obviously against enemy attacks. It was a World War II tactic, I believe. There was just a blackout of lights. They had to turn off all the lights and so on. But apart from that, you wouldn't see any difference. So I would say I'm very impressed with what I've seen in Pakistan from the people. That there's a strong love of Islam. Certainly compared to what we've seen in UAE or Saudi Arabia about them bringing in, concerts with like women scantily clad from the West, importing these singers in the West. And I think one of the lyrics she said during one of her, I forgot the name of the singer, I forgot who it was, and she said because she was probably saying this to her American audiences, and she did the same thing in Saudi Arabia, bow down to a goddess, right? She was saying that in Saudi Arabia. And then you see, these massive like statues and things in these parades and things, what have you, in Saudi Arabia of all places, and Hindu temples being built in UAE while mosques are taken down in India. I see a very big difference. I think if any Pakistani person feels dejected or feels very despondent about Pakistan, they should be given a paid trip to some Arab countries, and they'll come back full of positivity about Pakistan. It will change their whole view. Like, you know what? We actually have it pretty good here by comparison. There's more, especially on the speech department as well.
That's what I want to say. So maybe from Dawa perspective, this is actually the best place in the Muslim world. Don't you think so?
It's one of the best places in terms of speech. Lebanon is also a good place, but only because the government has actually split between multiple factions by design, a Christian faction, a Sunni faction, a Shia faction, such that as long as you maybe don't necessarily mention a particular faction by name and attack them, you can say whatever you want in Lebanon. But in most Arab countries, unfortunately, ruled by dictatorships, there was a saying I heard, which is the only one you can open your mouth to is a dentist. Right, and that's a difference. So we couldn't be having this podcast in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, we couldn't be having this podcast in UAE. Maybe because I'm a British citizen, they might just deport me. They wouldn't. But if you were a UAE citizen, for example, you'd be arrested, and bad things could happen.
Yeah. So, okay, another interesting thing I would like to ask is, I heard some podcast of yours. One of them was on the 100th anniversary of the fall of the Khilafah, and you seem to be a da'i of Khilafah, an advocate of the Khilafah, and I was wondering how come? So sometimes now, alhamdulillah, even in Pakistan, the Khilafah is like a buzzword, and everyone, alhamdulillah, is talking about it. But 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that was not the case. So what's your way? How did you come to being an advocate of the Khilafah?
Well, I came to be an advocate of Khilafah because I'm a Muslim. And for me, as many reverts or converts will tell you this, one of the things that puzzles us, we spent so many years trying to find the truth, and to discover that it exists, alhamdulillah, and that it's known by over 1.45 billion people on the planet Earth already know it. Oh, great, let's go. They're probably implementing it. But then to discover, to our shock and surprise, that they are not implementing it. And it's not a question of like, oh, maybe it's because it's just, like they have a weakness. I mean, look, let's say if someone's a drug addict, they're trying to get rid of that. It's it's hard. I understand that, yeah? To get off drugs or to get off a certain vice. Maybe sometimes some people like to lie or backbite. Sometimes it slips out. They don't think. These are vices which affect many people. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to a political system, it's not a question of I need to overcome my internal issues. No, it's, well, what are we going to live by? Well, we're all Muslim, right? So what are the rules? Well, here's the rules. Okay, let's implement it then. Like, no one's going to, even in an Islamic system, no one's going to tell you what to do in your own house. Yeah, but in public, the public social contract, well, let's let the creator of the universe, which we all believe in, decide for us and resolve our problems. So it's not, so that's the thing. Like me coming to Pakistan, I don't view it as coming to a foreign country. I view it as coming to a part of my ummah, just in a different geographical location. Mm-hmm. So yeah, sure, they're going to look a little bit different. They're going to speak a different language, but it's still, for me, the same land, the land of Islam, the land of Muslims. I don't see it as anything like this. So to see Muslims confused by nationalism or not implementing the very Quran that they so diligently recite is baffling to many converts and reverts when we initially convert to Islam. So me being an advocate of Khilafah is as natural as me praying my salah. It's part and parcel of the same thing. That's what Islam says. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam left two things behind. Okay, one thing he left behind was ilm, which is kept by the scholars. So the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets in ilm. But who is the inheritor of the prophet in amr, authority, it's Khilafah. They are the success. Khilafah literally means the successors of who? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His successorship as the leader of the Ummah as one Jama'ah. Right? Not Jama'ah in the sense of a political party or Jama'ah in the sense of one madhab. No.
The community as the
Jama'ah in Arabic means we come together physically. Like we go Jama'at. We salli in Jama'ah. We do a prayer in a congregation. We might have difference of opinion. No problem. You know, the most fascinating thing is the salah is a great example of Muslim unity. You know why? In salah, it is obligatory, as you know, to recite the Surah Fatiha after every rak'ah. You can't do ruku and sujood before you finish reciting Surah Fatiha. Yet, if the Imam finishes it before you and does the takbir, you have to stop what you're doing, even if you haven't finished it, and you have to go into ruku. So the Imam is the leadership and the unity behind the Imam is so important that even your individual obligation can be, in essence, has to make way for following the Imam. Of course, then the Imam Salah is we get the ajr, the reward from the Imam Salah. So as a collective, and our salahs are multiplied, 27 times by that congregation prayer. So the Khilafah is the same thing.
So as a member of the Ummah you're talking about, do you have some expectations from Pakistan? Do you see Pakistan as having the potential to lead the Ummah out of its so many miseries that it's facing?
I think there was a narration or an athar, I forget which one it was. It was perhaps an athar by a Sahabi. I have to find a source, which was, I think it was a time when there was, at the time of maybe Imam Ali, he saw an Arab guy mocking a non-Arab. And I'm going to paraphrase. He says, you're like this now because you brought Islam to them. But there'll come a time where they will bring Islam to you. Right, to paraphrase, and I have to check the source of this again. But I see that many of the non-Arab countries, Malaysia, Turkey, Pakistan, and a few others, I see them as giving examples of the way forward for the Muslim Ummah. That they are, defiant. They're holding their own. They don't just cave in to external forces, but instead they hold their own. They develop themselves, they become independent. That's what I'm seeing with Turkey, its own arms industry. It's becoming self-reliant. Pakistan is becoming self-reliant, or in a sense it has to an extent, but is joint ventures with different countries like China. It's fine, every country has joint ventures, but at least it's a joint venture. It's not just, okay, we'll just only buy, we won't do anything. We just buy your technology. No, we will do joint development of a fighter, right? The Joint Strike Fighter program. So that's its own rockets, its own cruise missiles. And of course, Malaysia and Indonesia to some extent are developing technology in all their microchips and different things like this. So they're developing these industries. And even Persia, there's obviously a few issues with Persia as it is today, but the Persians, the general mass of the Persians would be considered by Ibn Taymiyyah to still be, they're Muslim still, right? Whether Shia or not, the common masses are Muslim. And look at them. Despite sanctions, Iran has a spaceport. Last time I checked, and I might have changed since I last checked, but there was only 10 countries in the whole world that has a spaceport. Okay? I think Pakistan has one, but technically I don't think Pakistan was constructed it, but Iran made theirs. Okay? Look at that. I remember when I was in Algeria, and it was after there was a civil war in Algeria, because an Islamic party won the elections, and then the military just cancelled the elections. I said no. And the military used some clever means. Everyone was against the military for what they were doing. So what they did is they found or invented or made a group that was meant to be a splinter from one of the fighting groups, the Muslim fighting groups against them. And this group only targeted the people. They killed people, men, women, children, in villages and towns which were supporters of the Islamic parties. Never the ones that were military towns or places. Only the towns and places that were pro-Islamic. So when these towns and places were attacked by these people that were dressed in to look extra Islamic, you could say, they thought they were these Islamic fighters. They believed the propaganda and they started to support the government. And afterwards, the government won that war by simply making everyone turn against all the Islamic parties, even if they said, look, these people, they're not us who are doing the killings. They're not us. Yeah, it's not us that's doing it, but it doesn't matter now. Everyone focuses on this small minority group. After that, the common thing you could hear in Algeria was, we were saved from becoming like Iran. We were saved from becoming like Iran. And whenever they say, because that in the Algerian mind, that's what a very Islamic state is, right? I mean, Iran's not Islamic state, but anyway. And even when you wear a niqab, if you're a woman that wears niqab in Algeria, they were nicknamed Iranians, right? That's how they viewed it. It might have changed now, of course. But I thought to myself, and I spoke out. I said, well, wait a second. You're saying that you were saved from being backward, but Iran has a spaceport. What do you have? Algeria. You don't have anything. Yeah. So you actually are less developed. The countries that are closer to Islam, or they at least have a more Islamic flavor to their policies, even if it's not proper full Islam or
even if it's just for show. You're right.
Yeah, they're more developed.
Yeah.
They're actually more developed. Those that are more secular are the least developed.
I was visiting Iran in 2015, and honestly, I was very impressed by their infrastructure, particularly their business incubation centers, because they have invested a lot in it, because they were forced to develop technology, as you said, because of the sanctions and the embargoes and everything. So they were really doing a wonderful job, and many things over there. I even wrote something when I came back. So many things I found technologically and progress-wise closer to Europe than to any of the other Asian or neighboring countries of Iran. So that's right, I agree. So, in Pakistan, unfortunately, even though we now have this debate of Khilafah, this understanding coming up, many influencers are calling towards it, but mainstream politics somehow still seems to be focused on a discussion of something like, on one hand you have democracy, civil democracy, and on the other hand you have a military rule, and then they have this hybrid kind of a solution which you see these days. Did you get a feel of that, and what's your take on this love of democracy that our elite has?
Well, after the colonial era, I mean, the idea that democracy will solve everyone's problems became the popular idea. Ironically, of course, France's emergence as a more modern world power, at least one that dominated Europe, came due to a dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a dictator, a liberal dictator, but liberalism doesn't require democracy. It just requires liberal policies. Everyone forgets that. So the discussion on democracy, but what they don't realize two things, maybe three things. First, democracy usually only works to some extent in a homogenous society. If you have multiple ethnic groups in society, and they are sizable, you're going to have civil war. Because the question is, the state represents who? And you might say, well, it represents everyone in that state. But at some point, you have to determine what's the official language of the state, right? Is it Punjabi? Is it Urdu? Is it Balochi? Is it Pashtun? Yeah. Is it what is going to be the majority bloc are going to be the ones who decide most of the policies, and everyone's going to usually vote along ethnic lines. So democracy tends to bring out civil wars. Ethiopia is an example. Myanmar is actually having 3 civil wars at the moment, right? Because it has multiple ethnic groups. There are, even in states such as India, where everyone ignorantly outside it thinks that Indians are all one ethnic group, which is not the case. Of course, you have tensions between those in the south. In different states, there are actually a number of insurgent groups that want to succeed from India down there because there are different ethnic groups. They don't want to be dominated by New Delhi and a particular majority group there. So in many countries where you have sizable minorities, democracy ends up with civil wars, or at least in its best version, noticeable social and political tensions. Belgium between Dutch speakers and French speakers. Canada between French speakers and English speakers, right? You see tensions. Now, United States of America, you might think, well, everyone speaks English, so it's all fine. But because there's a growing majority of Hispanic immigration and Spanish speakers, you're seeing, again, cultural tensions rise between, and a more right-wing government that's anti-immigration is arising. So this is what democracy does. It's rule of the majority, rule of the mob. And unless you have a homogenous society, it tends to not work very well. People tried regional federalization, but the problem is that would only work if the central government is extremely weak, and then eventually they just split off anyway, right? In the different countries, right? So you can't keep a country together under democracy when there is sizable minorities. That's one point. The second point is there is a lack of knowledge as to viable alternatives to democracy. So an Islamic system, the problem I find with many Muslims who don't want an Islamic system is they just don't know what it looks like. And that's because most Muslims don't know what an Islamic system looks like. They just think it's a version of some kind of, either it's an Islamic democracy where you just have political parties who are Islamic and they happen to get elected by the majority, like hopefully, or it's a dictator who just puts the Shahada on the flag, or he puts Allahu Akbar on the flag or something, and he goes on Hajj and he talks about Islam a lot, and that's an Islamic state. Or they think it's an Islamic state where people check to see that your trousers is above your ankles when you do your prayer, or they check to see how many prayers you do, right? Where in this history of the Khilafat was any of these the case? And the caliphs were not dictators. They had actually, to some extent, there were variations, of course, and issues, but a lot of these caliphs were limited by the Sheikh al-Islam, and about 12 Ottoman caliphs were removed from power due to a fatwa from the Sheikh of Islam. They are no longer fit to be the leader of the Khilafah. So an Islamic system is one actually based on shura, discussion, open discussion, not by restrictions of what you can say in terms of criticizing policies. You can criticize anyone's policies. No problem. You're not going to get arrested. You shouldn't be arrested for this. Islam gives you the right to speak the truth wherever you want. Fear the censorship of no one. This is from an author or hadith, sorry. So we're commanded to this, to speak what is the truth and don't fear anyone's censorship. This gives us a right. So an Islamic system is one where you don't have a dictator, but you have a restricted leadership where they are answerable to the people. The scholars can remove them. So scholars are not just people that just talk sometimes and give lectures or do Friday khutbahs and that's it. The scholars actually were judges. They had political or legal authority, and the head judges can remove leaders if they go outside the bounds of Islam or they commit a public sin, for example, and bring the whole Khilafah into dispute. Is this just my ideas right now? No. Go into Imam Wadi's book. Go into Ibn Khaldun's book, right? There's tons of discussions. Go to Ibn Taymiyyah's book on Siyasa Sharia. It's in these classical texts. It's there. Okay. We just need to update it by using modern technology. Yeah. That's it. Not to change it, the laws, just use modern technology to do the same thing. And right now, Khilafah is more feasible. There was I noticed that at the time of, just before the time of Salahuddin, so the time of, I was doing an article on Imam Ghazali at his time. At the time of Imam Ghazali, the Abbasid Khilafah stretched from Lisbon to Lahore. Right? So my country to this country, the Abbasid Khilafah, right? Or from Portugal to Pakistan, so it has a nice, good alliteration there. So, but it would take maybe a year to travel from one end to the next. Now it takes less than a day, if that.
More practical, as you said.
It's more practical. Emails, phones, that's it.
Sheikh, last question. Gaza. Mm-hmm. So it's even to watch what's happening over there is unbearable. My question to you would be, do you think that Pakistan being a strong nation, as you said, being a nation which just came out victorious from this skirmish with the Indians, the mini war which we just fought, do we have a responsibility to play?
All Muslims have a responsibility to play. I won't going to put this solely on the shoulders of Pakistanis only, but every Muslim has an obligation to speak out against it, to demand the local government's actions on the international stage, and it has to be something serious. Now, the thing is this: it's going to take more than one Muslim state to resolve our problems. It'll take more than one Muslim state to resolve the Kashmir problem, which has been called the Palestine of the East, right? They faced occupation, massacres, brutal oppression and occupation by Indian soldiers, the most heavily militarized land on earth, subhanAllah. Even though the Israelis have an occupation of the West Bank, but there's not nearly as much military density as there is in Kashmir. 700,000 Indian troops. Now, I don't expect the Pakistani army alone to be able to rescue them. And likewise, I don't expect the Pakistani army alone to rescue the people in Gaza. But what I do expect is the armies of Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Pakistan, Iran, Azerbaijan, all these people, and Malaysia can all get together and resolve these problems. And I don't just mean only militarily. I'll tell you some surprising things. You'll be completely surprised by this. Just think of this. Imagine when India was saber rattling and calling to war and was about to threaten, suspended the water treaty, the Indus water treaty with Pakistan. Imagine the whole Muslim world said, well, if you want to do this, India, then the Strait of Malacca in Malaysia is now prohibited for Indian ships. You're not going to use the Suez Canal. We're not going to buy from you. And all planes can't go through any Muslim country. That means that India has to go to, if you're going to get from India to England, you have to go all the way around Arabia, around Sudan, all the way around Morocco, right? It's just too much. An Indian ship has to go through all the way around Africa or maybe through around Australia.
But do you see this happening?
Just to do trade. Indian economy would be brought to its knees, because I know that China's not going to let them fly through there. India will be literally cut off. It will collapse. Its economy will collapse with no bullets being fired at all. It just needs the Muslim Ummah to simply give a united response.
Do you see this happening under the rule-based, nation-state-based system, where it's the national interest that is actually the highest goal of a nation?
Well, as I said, you won't be able to persuade an Afghan necessarily that could Pakistan use its air bases so it can have strategic depth? Because right now, anyone who looks at geography, as you know, the major Pakistani populations areas are right next to the Indian border. There's no strategic depth to absorb or have some distance to deal with missiles and planes. Whereas India moved its airplanes eastward so that it could actually be away from any bombardments. It didn't always work, but they had the option. Pakistan doesn't. And all because of this imaginary boundary drawn by some Western guy, the Durand line, that says that these are two separate countries, when these are peoples that both believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. How are they two separate peoples? They're one people, right? There's only one people here, right? The Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I think the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and he said, now there's only two people, like the rejectors of truth, the kuffar and disbelief and sinners, and unrepentant sinners, the kuffar and so on, and the believers. There's only two types of people now. This is what he was bringing. Are we true believers in what the Prophet Muhammad said in that, or are we rejecting what he said in that? So there's yeah, there's different languages, great, different food, even better. I love different foods from different places, but we are one people.
We're one people and we should have one leader. Is that the case?
The caliph is the main military shield and organizer of all the Muslim armed forces. You can have ministers, you can have elections for different ministers and representatives in the majlis of the people. Sure, no problem. But you need one, like in NATO, you need one overall commander who organizes the entire military of the Muslim world, because as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the Imam is the shield behind which the Ummah fight and protect themselves. So if we have no Imam, we have no immune system. We have no protection.
إِنَّمَا الْإِمَامُ جُنَّةٌ يُقَاتِلُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِ وَيُتَّقَى بِهِ. That's the hadith which you just said. So, Jazakallah khair, brother. Thank you very much for visiting Pakistan, your country. You belong here as well. And thank you very much for being on this podcast. We expect you to come again, inshallah, with some more questions and different topics. Jazakallah khair.
Barakallahu feekum, family.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.